The scream cleaved the winter dark, and the abandoned farmhouse held its breath. Elena Ward stepped over a split plank and whispered, "Lily, answer me." Wind pressed through the door like a lung exhaling frost. A porcelain doll lay sideways, bright as a tooth in soot. Mark Harlan said, "Stay behind me," but his voice glanced off the walls. Something dragged across boards in the room ahead, slow and wet. Elena swallowed the copper taste of dread, and moved anyway. "Lily, it's Mama," she said. "I'm here." The doll's painted mouth seemed damp with shadow. Jonah Pike watched from the threshold and murmured, "If it whispers thrice, it takes what it names." The house answered with a whisper shaped like Lily. It stroked Elena's name once, then twice, then waited like a grin. Ava Cross lifted her phone flashlight and begged, "Please, don't call her again." A nail ticked the floor, counting down. Silence sagged, and the doll faced the door without hands. The third whisper came thin as hair and cut the night into ribbons. Dawn gnawed at the edges of the fields, while the farmhouse kept its secrets. Elena sat in the cruiser and held the doll in a plastic bag, afraid to blink. Mark said, "We log it, then rest." Rest felt like a joke left on a grave. The seatbelt dug into her chest as if it knew something she would not face. Jonah tapped on the glass and did not meet her eyes. "It speaks in debt," he said, "not in mercy." Elena said, "Lily is alive," and the word alive wobbled like a bridge in wind. Ava gripped the steering wheel and stared at the rear view, expecting the house to follow. The fields stretched like bandages, and every row hid a cut. Mark tried a half smile, but it fell off his face before it reached her. The radio hissed, then whispered Elena's name with the softness of rot. She pulled the battery as if pulling a thorn from her own mouth. The station smelled like paper and tired coffee, a sanctuary that lied. Mark logged the doll under property and wrote too carefully, as if neatness could unmake it. Elena said, "Play the body cam," and her voice came out thinner than she wanted. The footage showed dust glittering like teeth and ended in noise. "I glitch," Ava said, but her face told a different story. Jonah waited in the lobby with his hat twisting in his hands. He said, "It names what is loved so it can be owned." Elena flinched and stared at the blank monitor until it stared back. Mark said, "We work the grid and check culverts." The words rattled like old tools and did not cut. The doll's bag fogged from the inside for a second, and no one breathed until it cleared. Somewhere down the hall, a printer started on its own and printed only her name. They canvassed the back roads where snow thinned to glass. Elena called until her throat rasped, and the ditches answered with bottles and crows. A mailbox bore Lily's sticker, a faded star that hurt to see. Mark said, "We will find her," and kicked a rut like it had lied to him. Ava handed out flyers that shook in the wind like trapped birds. Jonah followed the fence line, whispering numbers under his breath that did not add up. Elena said 3 whispers, and the world tilted as if the phrase were a lever. The sky went the color of old milk, and pressed low as a ceiling. A culvert hummed with meltwater, cold and fast as a dare. From inside, a child's voice echoed her name, and then repeated it softer, asking to be heard again. The culvert breathed cold as a cellar, and smelled of iron. Elena knelt and said, "Lily, I hear you," but the echo returned with someone else's temperature. Mark lay flat, and shone his light into the throat of concrete. Water jittered like a lie trying to stand. Ava said, "That voice is old," and the words shook her lips. Jonah tossed a scrap of red thread into the flow, and watched it snag and vanish. "Debt collects," he said, and did not step closer. Elena pressed her palm to the rim, until the cold stung her bones. "Take me instead," she whispered, and the tunnel clicked like a tongue deciding. A small shape bumped her boot, and settled heavy as a verdict. It was the ribbon from Lily's doll, wet and tied, in a knot only Lily used. The farmhouse was far behind, yet its shadow clung like smoke. Elena sat at her kitchen table, fingers pressed into grooves worn by years of meals. "She should be here," she whispered, though no one answered. The porcelain doll rested on the counter in its sealed bag, fogging faintly. Mark stood near the sink and muttered, "We'll find her, but you have to sleep." Ava leaned against the doorframe, eyes hollow from replaying sounds she wished she hadn't heard. Jonah rocked slightly in a chair, voice low. The whispers move house to house if you carry them. Elena felt the walls lean closer, listening with her own heart. A floorboard cracked upstairs, though no one had gone up. She stiffened and said, "Lily's room is closed." The air cooled until their breaths were visible. The doll's head turned inside the bag, straining against plastic, and every light bulb hummed like a throat about to speak. Dawn cracked gray over the rooftops, but the sky brought no relief. Mark drove slow through town, dropping flyers at each porch. "Someone saw her," he repeated like a chant. Elena clutched the passenger door, scanning every yard for Lily's pink ribbon. Ava worked the backseat, folding paper after paper with restless hands. Jonah stared out the window, muttering, "Not seen. Heard." Elena bit her lip hard enough to taste iron. Houses blurred by, cheerful in color but sick in silence. A dog barked once and went quiet, ears pinned. "She's here," Elena said, though the word bent under doubt. Mark's jaw flexed, holding anger in place. The radio fizzled, then whispered a child's giggle, one that Elena recognized. Ava slapped it off, breathing ragged. No one spoke until they reached the edge of town, where the road narrowed like a throat. At the school gym, rows of tables sagged under coffee urns and lost posters. Parents huddled, whispering names into the air like prayers. Elena placed Lily's photo on the board, her hand shaking as if the paper burned. "She's my daughter," she said, voice cracking. Mark kept close, guiding volunteers to grid maps and ditch lines. Ava taped posters to glass doors until her palms stung. Jonah stood at the edge, warning no one to say the child's name aloud, earning only glares. The gym buzzed with voices, then faltered when the sealed doll thudded against its bag. Elena's knees weakened, but she held herself upright. A father said, "I heard whispers near the mill," and the crowd shivered at his tone. "It's starting again," Jonah muttered, and the words buried the air in dread. Evening bruised the horizon as Elena returned home, fatigue sewn into her skin. She pushed open Lily's bedroom door, though she swore it had been locked. The wallpaper peeled, and toys sat facing the bed as if listening. The porcelain doll rested on the pillow, though it had never left the station. Elena whispered, "No," and stepped back, but the air pushed her forward. Mark rushed in behind, revolver drawn, only to lower it when he saw a room of stillness. Ava covered her mouth, muffling a scream as the doll's head pivoted. Jonah said, "It chooses where to be." Elena's chest tightened, grief and terror twined until she could not breathe. From the doll's lips, faint as dust, came Lily's laugh. The night settled like wet cloth, heavy and airless. Elena sat at the foot of Lily's bed, trembling, while the doll stared from the pillow. Mark said, "We lock it away," but his voice carried no belief. Ava leaned against the wall, eyes rimmed red. Jonah whispered, "Debt must be paid. It never leaves empty." Elena stroked the ribbon she had found at the culvert, tears falling. She said, "If it wants a name, it will not have hers." The bulb flickered and went black, leaving only their breaths. A whisper licked across the dark, counting in threes. Something brushed Elena's shoulder, soft as hair, though nothing moved. She clutched the ribbon tighter, and in the pitch, Lily's voice sang her name once, sweet as a lullaby turned cruel. The library basement smelled of dust and mildew, but the records it held were older than the town itself. Elena traced her fingers over cracked ledgers, until Lily's name seemed to glow among missing children, listed decades apart. Mark said different years, same house. Ava whispered, each child gone without trace. Jonah leaned over the table, eyes hollow, always after the third whisper. The air pressed colder, rattling loose pages like breath. Elena swallowed hard and asked, Why ours? Jonah did not answer, only tapped on a faded photograph pinned to the ledger. It showed a girl with a doll identical to Lily's. Elena's chest tightened until she could not inhale. The basement's single bulb flickered, shadows twisting across their faces. A whisper leaked between the shelves, curling her name in syllables that did not belong to paper or air. Outside the library, snow flurried under street lamps that hummed with static. Elena clutched the photograph of the girl and doll, her breath uneven. "She looks like Lily," she whispered. Mark shook his head. "It's another generation. Another victim." Ava tucked her scarf tighter and said, "But the doll hasn't aged." Jonah murmured, "It doesn't need to." They walked toward the cruiser, their steps muffled by snow, but each footfall echoed twice, as though something followed unseen. Elena glanced over her shoulder, nothing there, yet her gut twisted. A whisper brushed her ear, so close it felt like lips. She froze, clutching the photograph tighter until the edge cut her palm. Mark called her name, but she did not answer, staring into the dark between lamps where the snow refused to fall. The mill loomed at the edge of town, black windows like sockets. Elena stepped inside with flashlight trembling in her grip. "Lily," she whispered, though she feared the answer. Mark scanned rusted machines, revolver steady but low. Ava stuck close, heart racing at each drip echoing through the cavern. Jonah trailed, muttering, "This is where the last girl was taken." Elena's light caught a child's shoe on the floor, soaked dark. She knelt, fingers trembling, and whispered, "She was here." Mark pulled her up, shaking his head. "Don't call her again." A metallic groan rose from overhead rafters. Dust rained like ash as a whisper slithered from every corner at once, her name braided into echoes. Ava screamed and dropped her light, leaving only shadows. The four gathered in the sheriff's office, maps spread like wounds across the table. Mark stabbed his finger at the farmhouse perimeter. "Every disappearance ties back here." Elena whispered, "Then why her room?" Ava paced, clutching her arms. "Because she belongs to it now," she muttered, tears breaking her voice. Jonah said, "It doesn't take, it trades. That doll binds the debt." Silence filled the room, heavier than any argument. Elena slammed her hand on the desk, trembling. "Then I'll give it me," she said, voice cracking like glass. Mark snapped back, "You won't." But Jonah only stared at the doll on the evidence tray, its painted eyes reflecting every fluorescent bulb above. Midnight crawled into Elena's house like rot. She sat in Lily's room, the doll on her lap, though every nerve screamed to throw it away. "You can take me," she whispered. The doll's painted lips curved almost imperceptibly. The wallpaper peeled further, curling toward her like ears. Mark burst in, fury twisted in his face. "Don't you dare," he shouted. Ava appeared behind him, whispering frantic pleas. Jonah stayed in the hall, silent, watching. The air thickened, breaths caught. A child's laugh danced across the ceiling, wrong in pitch and depth. Elena felt her body lean forward without her consent, as though pulled by invisible strings. "Say her name once more," a whisper teased, "and she is ours forever." The farmhouse groaned as if remembering. Elena stood at its threshold again, flashlight trembling in her hand. Mark said, "We burn it tonight." Ava whispered, "What if fire frees it instead?" Jonah muttered, "It doesn't burn. It waits." The walls pulsed with damp, breathing like lungs hidden in wood. Elena stepped inside, every board answering her weight with a complaint. Her heart crashed against her ribs, but she called, "Lily, if you are here, show me." A door down the corridor creaked, though no draft stirred. Mark raised his revolver, fingers steady, but his eyes betrayed doubt. Ava clutched her phone light, shaking. Jonah pressed his palm to the wall, listening like it whispered only to him. The air smelled of rust and childhood dust. The farmhouse shut behind them with a slam, sealing the dark. The corridor narrowed as if the walls leaned closer. Elena shone her beam across carved names etched into plaster, each gouged deep, each a child. They're all here, she whispered, throat breaking. Ava traced her hand over one name that looked freshly cut. Mark said, "This is a graveyard without bodies." Jonah whispered, "The doll carves what it owns." Elena felt her knees tremble, but forced herself forward. A door burst open ahead, spilling cold into the hallway. A faint giggle rattled against the rafters. Ava dropped the flyer she still clutched, and it fluttered into the dark like a dead leaf. Mark cursed and pulled her behind him. Elena saw Lily's name scratched deeper than the rest. Unfinished, as if still waiting for its last letter. The back room yawned open, cold spilling like a tide. Rusted bed frames stood crooked, rope coiled beneath, stained dark. Elena froze, whispering, "Lily slept here." Jonah said, "Every child did, before it claimed them." Ava's tears streaked her cheeks as she whispered, "This is wrong." Mark swept his light across the wall, revealing photographs pinned like trophies, faces of missing children. Elena's stomach dropped as one photo shifted, Lily's eyes flickering open for a breath before closing again. Mark barked, "We're leaving," but the door slammed shut, rattling hinges. Elena's light flickered, and in that brief pulse, the doll stood upright in the corner, head turned toward her. Jonah whispered, "It knows we're bargaining already." The farmhouse attic pressed low, rafters skeletal above them. Dust swirled in beams of weak light as Elena crawled up the steps. "Something's up here," she whispered. Ava stayed close, trembling. Mark followed, revolver raised, jaw tight. Jonah stayed below, chanting numbers under his breath. In the attic, dozens of dolls sat in rows, cracked porcelain faces, each with stitched ribbons. Elena gasped, recognizing Lily's among them. "It collects," she whispered, voice breaking. A doll's head twisted toward her with a snap. The others followed, porcelain necks grinding. Mark raised his weapon, but lowered it, knowing bullets meant nothing. Ava whimpered, pressing against Elena. One doll whispered Elena's name, followed by Lily's voice hidden inside it. Elena's knees buckled under the weight of it. Midnight thickened as they descended, silence pressing like hands. Elena gripped the doll she found, fingers trembling. Jonah said, "Once taken, a name cannot be uncarved." Elena snapped, "Then carve mine instead." Ava cried, "Don't," her voice breaking. Mark dragged his hand through his hair, fury masking fear. The living room stretched before them, fireplace filled with ashes of burned toys. Elena stepped into the center, holding the doll high. "Take me," she said, her voice raw. A draft whirled through, lifting soot into spirals. The doll's eyes flared with faint glow, whispering her name once, then twice. Jonah whispered, "The third will not stop." Elena closed her eyes, waiting for the last whisper, but instead the fire roared to life without flame, lighting the walls in Lily's laughter. The farmhouse shook as if waking, and Elena clutched the doll tighter. Jonah whispered, "This is the unholy echo, the debt repeating." Ava trembled, saying, "Lily isn't the first." Mark's voice cracked, "You knew, Jonah." Silence dug deep as Jonah lowered his head. "I was a boy," he muttered, "and my sister was taken by the same whispers." Elena's stomach twisted as if the words carved into her. The doll hummed with faint vibration, the air ringing like glass struck. Elena cried, "You let this happen, again and again." Jonah's tears streaked through years of silence. The floorboards heaved, dust filling their lungs, and the photographs upstairs fell one by one. The laughter of dozens of children cascaded through the walls, all tangled in Lily's echo. Elena whispered, "We are inside its throat." The farmhouse walls pulsed, and the carved names bled fresh. Elena pressed her palm against Lily's half-written name, her voice shaking. "Finish mine instead." Ava cried, "Don't!" Mark pulled at her arm, but Elena stayed. Jonah whispered, "It accepts trades, not sacrifices." The wall groaned as if considering, plaster cracking in slow veins. A child's handprint appeared beside Lily's name, too small and too fresh to belong to anyone alive. Elena's tears burned her face as she whispered again, "Take me." A chorus of voices hissed in reply, but Lily's voice alone rose above them, laughing, sweet, and sharp. Mark struck the wall with his fist, roaring in rage. The laugh cut to silence. Dust fell like snow in the dead of night. They pushed into the cellar, where the earth sweated with damp. Rows of jars lined the shelves, each holding scraps of ribbon, teeth, and small bones. Ava gagged, pressing her sleeve over her mouth. Elena whispered, "It keeps them all." Mark shone his light, face pale but rage burning. Jonah said, "These are offerings, proof of bargains made." Elena stepped closer to a jar with Lily's red ribbon, still wet. Her knees gave out, sobbing. She was here. The jars rattled, as if from laughter inside. Ava screamed when one cracked, spilling a child's tooth onto the dirt. Mark raised his revolver but lowered it uselessly. Elena's hands shook as she reached for the ribbon jar, though Jonah shouted, "Do not touch it." Midnight deepened as the cellar door slammed shut above them. The walls breathed with mold and cold. Elena gripped the doll, whispering, "Lily, I will not leave you." Ava begged, "We're trapped." Mark hammered at the door, rage echoing in the hollow dark. Jonah crouched, muttering, "Every bargain takes blood." Elena held her hand out, trembling. "Then, it will be mine." A nail dragged across the stone floor, etching her name in jagged lines. The sound scraped her bones raw. Mark turned, grabbing her shoulders, yelling, "No more!" Elena's tears burned as the doll's mouth moved, Lily's voice calling Mama. The cellar lights blew out, plunging them into a dark alive with whispers. A sudden silence pressed over them, thick and final. Elena raised the doll higher, voice raw, "If this is dead, then take me. End this." Mark's cry broke as he tried to wrench it from her hands. Ava screamed, "Don't let it choose you." Jonah whispered, "It already has." The cellar floor split, earth opening like a throat. Children's laughter rose from the crack, stitched with Lily's voice calling her mother's name. Elena's body trembled, but she did not let go. The doll's eyes gleamed faint light, then rolled upward as if satisfied. Dust spiraled in the air, tasting of iron. Elena whispered one last time, "Let her go." The cellar swallowed the sound, leaving them all shaking, waiting for the debt to collect its due. The cellar rumbled like a throat swallowing them whole. Elena clutched the doll tighter, her pulse frantic. Mark yelled, "We're getting out now," but the stairs had rotted into splinters. Ava sobbed, gripping Elena's arm. Jonah whispered, "It doesn't let you leave until it's fed." The earth cracked wider, and shadows climbed like smoke. Elena raised her voice above the chaos, "Then take me, and let Lily live." The doll twitched in her arms, its mouth parting to whisper once. Mark pulled her back, shouting her name with rage that broke into desperation. Ava cried, "It's already begun," as a second whisper came, curling through the dark. Jonah fell to his knees, muttering prayers that no god could hear. Elena squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the final call. The whisper came a third time, but it did not take Lily. It stretched Elena's name until it broke. Her body convulsed as if strings tugged her bones. Ava screamed, holding her tighter. Mark wrapped his arms around her, shouting, "Fight it!" The cellar air froze, their breaths hanging like smoke. Jonah whispered, "Once the third whisper comes, there is no stopping it." Elena's voice cracked as she shouted back, "Then I'll break the cycle." She slammed the doll onto the dirt floor, shattering its porcelain head. For a second, silence stretched like eternity. Then the walls howled, voices of children spilling into the room, deafening. The fragments of the doll crawled together, stitching themselves into place, whispering laughter in Lily's voice. The fragments knit themselves into a doll again, but its face bore cracks that bled black shadow. Elena whispered, "It won't stop," her voice trembling. Mark lifted his revolver, shouting, "Then we end it here." He fired, each shot ringing uselessly as the doll absorbed the bullets. Ava covered her ears, screaming. Jonah growled, "It only trades, never breaks." Elena staggered forward, holding the ribbon Lily once tied, and said, "Then take me, completely." The doll tilted its cracked head, its voice split between dozens of children. Lily's laugh rang clearest. Elena's tears fell hot as she whispered, "She is mine, not yours." The shadows surged, pressing them into the earth as if the house itself wanted to bury them alive. The cellar cracked upward, revealing the farmhouse above like a wound. Dust and ash fell as the dolls from the attic clattered down the stairs, lining the dirt floor. Each turned its head in unison, whispering names. Elena stood trembling, surrounded. Mark pulled her back, shouting, "We can't fight all of them." Ava wept, whispering, "It's over." Jonah stared at the dolls with dead eyes and muttered, "It wants her soul." Elena gripped the ribbon tighter and shouted, "If it takes me, it ends here." The dolls' eyes glowed faint, their whispers rising into a chorus. A sharp wind tore through the cellar, extinguishing all light but their glow. Elena's hair whipped as she screamed Lily's name, daring the echoes to break. The cellar floor buckled open wider, revealing endless dark beneath. Elena stepped toward it, ribbon raised, shouting, "Take me, leave her." The dolls screamed as one, their whispers slicing the air. Mark grabbed her arm, crying, "No." Ava collapsed, sobbing, unable to speak. Jonah whispered, "It will only choose." Elena threw the ribbon into the abyss. For one heartbeat, everything stilled. The laughter stopped, the whispers cut off. Then a child's cry rose from below, Lily's voice calling Mama. Elena's face broke as she answered, "I'm here." The dark surged upward, swallowing her in one breath. Mark roared, lunging, but the crack sealed before his hands reached her. Silence fell heavy. Only the doll remained on the dirt, its face smooth, blank and smiling. The farmhouse stood silent under the bruised dawn, its windows dark as sockets. Mark staggered out carrying Ava, her body trembling, her sobs breaking the morning air. Jonah followed, face gray, eyes hollow, muttering, "It took her." Mark whispered, "It took Elena," as if saying her name kept her alive. The fields around them stretched empty, frost glittering like shards. The house seemed smaller now, but its shadows still reached their feet. Ava clutched Mark's coat, begging, "We can't let it end here." Jonah shook his head, voice a grave. "It never ends. It waits for the next name." The wind shifted, and a faint laugh carried across the barren ground, curling into their ears. At the station, silence pressed heavier than any file. Mark sat at his desk, revolver lying useless, his hand trembling above it. Ava stared at Lily's flyer, tears dripping onto the paper. Jonah sat in the corner, head bowed, whispering to someone not there. "I failed her again," he muttered, voice barely alive. Mark slammed his fist onto the desk, roaring, "No one else is going to suffer this." Ava whispered, "But we already lost her," her words sharp as broken glass. The evidence bag with the porcelain doll rested on the steel tray, its painted smile untouched, mocking. The room's clock ticked too loud, each second like a countdown. None of them could stop. Night returned with its weight. Mark walked the roadside alone, flashlight beam bouncing across empty fields. Ava followed reluctantly, clutching her coat, whispering prayers. Jonah trailed behind, muttering numbers under his breath, like a ritual he couldn't stop. The air was colder now, sharp as knives against their skin. Mark said, "We will find something," though even he didn't believe it. Ava pointed at the culvert, where water still rushed like whispers. Jonah froze, saying, "Don't listen." But a voice called faintly from within, Lily's voice, soft and broken, crying, "Mama." Ava fell to her knees, screaming. Mark shone his light inside, face twisting as shadows shifted in the dark. Back at Elena's house, silence rotted in every corner. The walls peeled further. Lily's toys sat in a circle around her empty bed. Ava whispered, "It's waiting for us here too." Mark kicked a chair, fury burning through grief. Jonah muttered, "The house is only a doorway. The debt follows." The porcelain doll appeared again on the pillow, though it had been locked at the station. Its smile gleamed faint in the dying light. Mark lifted his revolver, pointing at it with shaking hands, whispering, "I'll end this." Ava cried, "No. It only wants us to break." The doll's head turned slowly on its own, cracking as it whispered Elena's name once, soft and cruel. The night deepened, heavy as a coffin lid. Mark sat in the living room, gun on his lap, staring at the dark. Ava curled on the couch, eyes red, whispering Elena's name like a prayer. Jonah stood at the window, muttering, "The next debt is already written." The porcelain doll rested on the mantel, untouched, yet its shadow stretched longer than it should. Suddenly, the radio hissed alive, though unplugged, whispering Lily's laugh. Mark's face broke, his grip on the revolver trembling. Ava screamed, "Turn it off," but no one moved. Jonah whispered, "It never ends, it only waits." The laugh grew softer, closer, and then whispered Mark's name 3 times. Silence fell, heavier than death itself.